From the KUDZUKIAN studios in Memphis, Tennessee, this is Artivism with your host, Linda Steele.
Welcome back to another episode of Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm your host, Linda Steele. Today's episode is very special and it's very timely. And unless you've been hiding under a rock, you know that there's been some controversy around the Supreme Court nomination of Judge Brett Kavanaugh, and it really resulted in testimony by Dr. Christine Blasey Ford about some allegations about Judge Kavanaugh. Well, regardless of what side you sit on in terms of politics, I think everyone is going to be interested in this episode because we're focusing on the artwork of the Time magazine cover from October 15th by John Mavroudis. John Mavroudis has had covers on the cover of Time magazine, The Nation magazine, and The New Yorker. And in this episode, we're really going to get into his artwork. We're going to talk about how he discovered he was an artist. We're also going to analyze this typographical portrait that he has on the cover of Time magazine. So you're going to want to get out your iPads or your cell phones and zoom into this portrait. And then we're going to talk about his future projects. So you're not going to want to miss one moment of this episode. So make sure to check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, or your favorite podcast provider. I'm your host, Linda Steele, and we'll be right back.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Grind Fed. I'm your host, Cynthia Daniels.
And I'm your co-host, Williams Brack.
So we're going to be interviewing business owners about their journey. What made them leave their 9-to-5 and just go out and create their own brand?
I think sometimes we overplan things and that can kind of cause a delay or setback. But I would definitely say dive in, get your name started, get your website up, get your business cards.
Grind Fed.
Sponsored by Epicenter, powered by the KUDZUKIAN Network. Find us on Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Google Play, and many of your podcast providers.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Welcome back to Artivism. As I said, we were going to be talking to a really interesting guest today. And I have on the phone John Mavroudis. John, how are you?
I'm doing fine, Linda. How are you doing?
Great. Thank you so much for calling in. I really appreciate it. I mean, this is so timely. And when I saw your work, I was just blown away. And we usually start Artivism by our guests telling us a little bit about their background. And for you, how'd you end up? What's the John Mavroudis story? How'd you become an artist?
I guess my love of comic books when I was a kid. Me and friends in second and third grade, we fished out some comic books from the back of a 7-Eleven dumpster when I was a kid, and I was really into the comic books. It got me into comic books, and I started tracing them, and started creating some of my own comics, and then eventually worked. I've always drawn my whole childhood. My uncle was an artist, and that helped a lot as well. And in high school, started getting a little more interested in politics, and in college became a political cartoonist for a college paper, and then worked in newspapers and magazines, and voila.
Now, did you have formal training? Did you go to art school or?
Not really. No, I went to, I majored in art, but I didn't really go to art school or any of that. I was more interested in kind of combination of art and journalism, and then kind of moved my way over to illustration for newspapers, and at a certain point started doing some posters. Got a chance to do some music posters, and got a gig with the Fillmore in San Francisco for their historic poster series, and then started doing a lot more of that.
Wow, that's just incredible. So I'm hearing you got interested in politics. So was it conscious, the combination of politics and art, or did that just happen?
It seemed like a natural thing to me. My relatives on my dad's side of the family were very political. They were from McGovern, and I remember being a kid and seeing their posters and bumper stickers on their rooms for my aunt and my uncle. There was all these anti-Nixon things and stuff, and I was like, so I started getting more interested in politics at the time, and I guess, again, through them, started listening to National Lampoon when I was a kid, and so it just, I guess, kind of politics sort of seeped into the conversation, and I don't think I've ever not been interested since then.
Wow, so your first job at the Fillmore?
Yeah, my first music, or like a pro job outside of like just illustrations in the newspapers was a Fillmore job. I started doing a poster series for different concerts. I would usually find a band that I would really like, and I would send an email in asking if I could do a poster for that. And more often than not, it was fine. So I ended up doing a lot of those, as well as some other music, because my other great love in life outside of my family is music and politics.
Oh, fantastic. You're listening to Artivism, and I'm your host, Linda Steele, on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm talking to John Mavroudis of the fabulous Time magazine cover from October 15th. John, now, we've been talking about your background, and I'd love to just jump on into today because it's so timely. It's Time Magazine, October 15th. I'm telling you, when I saw this, it just blew me away. Now, I know you've done this type of work before. Tell me more about what you do with the words. Is this a certain type of art? Is this something? How'd you get into this form?
I think I loved playing with typography early on, and I had done a couple of posters with faces made of type, but they weren't any particular person or anything. I just thought it looked kind of cool, and play with the letter form and see what you could create. And then when Donald Trump appeared on the scene, I was so angry. I was so upset about everything he represented that I thought, why don't I try to do a portrait of him, but instead of trying to find some different angle, I would just put everything I thought of when I thought of Donald Trump. So I started creating his face filled with words like liar and sociopath and sexist and racist and all the things, every word I could think of that I thought would aptly describe Donald Trump, I put into this illustration because I was basically tired of telling people the reasons why I didn't like him. And I figured if I could just show people why I didn't like him in one picture, that it would be a lot easier for me and I could get it all out. It was very cathartic. And when I'd finished, I sent it around to a few places, and The Nation magazine ran it as their pre-election cover, where they endorsed Hillary, and they titled it The Trump Phenomenon. So I did that, and then afterwards I did one for Hillary that was a little more flattering than the one I did for Trump, and where I used women throughout history because she represented like another step forward for women in terms of what they had been able to achieve. I mean, she was Secretary of State, and she was the first nominee for her major political party, and all these things. So I figured I should try to try to do it that way. I had taken these couple of ideas or these illustrations I had done previously. I had also created one for Harvey Milk with famous LGBTQ figures from throughout history and made his face up of that. So I took these 3 items and I had contacted Time magazine a couple of months ago and had shown them the kind of things I do as well as those examples, and they really liked the Hillary one and said, I got an email last Monday saying, could you do one for Dr. Christine Blasey Ford, and could you turn it around in a couple of days? Usually I take a couple of weeks or a month to do something like this, but I was like, yep, I can do that. I'll do it. And they kind of gave me the parameters of, we talked about what kind of image we wanted to show, and the iconic image was her raising her hand for the oath, and I thought when she closed her eyes, it looked like she was kind of in repose, like a prayer or something. So used that, and then started wandering through her testimony, trying to find images and phrases that captured the moment.
We are talking to John Mavroudis, the artivist, activist, illustrator, graphic designer, and you're listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm your host, Linda Steele.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Keeping it real, right, and funky.
Mauricio Calvo, who happens to be the executive director of Latino Memphis. Welcome to Funky Politics, sir. How are you?
Great. Thank you. You're having as much trouble saying my name as I do saying KUDZUKIAN, so we're even.
Hey, look, I'm good on that.
Yeah. Reasonable people understand that a country is more than its leader. I mean, I love my home country, but I think people in Memphis need to count their blessings.
Funky Politics on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Welcome back to Artivism. This is Linda Steele, your host on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm talking to John Mavroudis, the artist behind the incredible Time magazine cover of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. We've been talking about the backstory, a little bit about John's background, his training, and how he got into this type of work. What I'd really love a little bit more, John, we were just talking about Time magazine and how you turned this around in 2 days or something?
Yeah. If I had actually really thought about it, I might have said I couldn't do it, but I just, kind of pulled an all-nighter, and things fell together fairly well. There's a point when you're working that you're just hoping that it's not going to be 3 hours before deadline and you're looking at a mess. But that wasn't the case. I saw it slowly and gradually coming together in the way I hoped it would. And so I'd watched her, like most people, I had watched her testimony live, and then was just kind of in awe. And it was such an emotionally raw thing to hear as well. And when I got the assignment, I started rereading the transcripts and, like I said, pulling phrases. But Time also sent a list of things they thought was important, and we didn't want to go over. We didn't want to go over the aspects of the actual event that she is alleging happened in. I understand that. We didn't want her to be re-traumatized by the image. We wanted her to be fairly represented in terms of her feelings then and her feelings now and what she's going through. So it's not a complete portrait of a human being. It's a complete portrait of her, I think, for that moment in this event.
Mm-hmm. Now, I wanted to find out a little bit more about what went into this, because I'm looking at it right now, and every time I look at it, I keep seeing more, and wanted to know how. So you Time sent you some of the testimony. how did you choose what went where and how to, I'm looking at her hand, I'm looking at her hair, I'm looking at her eyes. How do you, is there a process? Tell us a little bit about your practice.
Yeah, so when I start this, I start looking for things that kind of jump out in terms of the senses, in terms of facial features. So for her forehead, or the area near the brain, we wanted to use things like words like seared into my memory. That was one phrase that stuck out. Another one was the laughter. She talked about embedded in the hippocampus was the laughter. And so there's certain phrases that where they go. When it came time to her hand, I was looking at, because the hand could be both a welcoming device or a deflecting device, and so I used a little of both. I used where she talked about she always tries to be collegial. She would be happy to try to help. But also the parts where she had to be. She was driven out of her house, and there were death threats, things like that. So, and then probably the most important part, where the part of the illustration was the mouth, where I originally had, I tried to yell for help on her lip, and then I took the word help out and put it where her teeth are, so it would be white and stark against the black background, and small. And so it's definitely, you see it, but it's almost like a desperate whisper for help as opposed to, something loud.
This is Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, speaking to John Mavroudis. We've been talking more about the details of this fabulous, would you call it a portrait, or how would you actually describe it for Time magazine?
Yeah, I think maybe a typographical portrait would be a good term.
Typographical portrait. I'm going to ask all the viewers, I've said it before, but just to remind you, if you pull out your cell phones, pull out your mobile phone, pull out your iPad, and really zoom into this image, and I'm sure this is the only place you're going to be able to do this, on Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and look at this typographical portrait and look how detailed it is. I also wanted to ask you about, I see the different colors even on her face, her cheekbone, her lips, part of her nose. What goes into deciding the different shades? I'm sure that's contour, but all of this is just fascinating to me.
I try to pick up skin tones as I go through the illustration, and so what I do is I use an iPad and a pencil, Apple Pencil, and I draw in the words very thinly where I want to place them on the face, and then gradually fill them out more and more, letter by letter, until they sort of merge into it. And then I'll do some color adjustments as well to make sure that it looks right to me. And at that point, when I'm finished with the entire piece, then I'll start adding some shading or shadowing. But I want it to be more graphic in nature, so it's not like you're not looking like at a photograph that you're seeing something the farther away you look. It looks more like a picture, but the closer you get, you can see there's a definite graphic nature to it, a graphic quality. So
now the blue, I don't recall if she was wearing blue or if this is something that you added. Why the blue below her chest?
Yeah, so she was wearing blue, but I was talking with the people at the time, and they were afraid that the color blue she was wearing might kind of be lost in the black, so we brought it out a little bit more and brightened it up. But that was what she was wearing, and I needed a little bit more place for some more of the testimony to go. I was considering putting more of it as sort of a background, but then we thought keeping it black was really the right way to go.
This is Linda Steele on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm talking to John Mavroudis, the artist of the October 15th cover of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. We've just been talking about all the work that goes into creating a masterpiece such as this. Each time I look at it, I see something different, and I encourage you to do the same and look at it again and again. Stay tuned, and we'll be right back.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Best in Blue.
That means we go to the schools, we go to the churches, we do all types of programs to try to build the relationship between law enforcement and the community.
Best in Blue on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
KUDZUKIAN!
Artivism. 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 Artivism.
Welcome back to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'm your host, Linda Steele, and I've been having a fascinating conversation with John Mavroudis. John, we've been talking about what goes into this work, and one of the things you said in the last segment, and I just wanted to make sure our listeners heard it, was the work that you did with an iPad Pro and an iPencil. I think a lot of our artists and students would love to learn a little bit more about that, because you said you paint, but if you had painted this, you would have never made deadline.
That's correct. There's a certain feeling of comfort with a tool that you know you could erase really quickly and start again if you have to, or make various versions of it. So if it's not quite working, you can go back to a previous version. So I do a lot of saving, and then save a brand new file based on the old file, and then continue trying different things. I think it makes you a little bit more courageous than you would be applying paint if you know in your head exactly what you want to capture. I'm not as confident with a brush, although I love painting. As I am with an iPad pencil, and I use Procreate, and it's just it's an easy app to use. It's fairly responsive, and it allows me to be able to create what I'm envisioning in a fairly straightforward manner. So that really helps. It's just another tool, right? We're all using different tools. So, yeah.
You hear that, artist, though? The app is what, Procreate?
Yeah, Procreate. You can download it. I think it's like $7 or $8 or something. It's very inexpensive compared to, the software used to be massively expensive for artists, but it's gotten a lot cheaper, and the quality is pretty amazing.
Perfect. I wanted to talk a little bit more about, this cover is out there. Everybody knows what happened with the confirmation of Brett Kavanaugh. What kind of feedback have you been receiving about this cover, about the image, about your masterpiece, really?
Well, I appreciate that, first of all. It's very kind. I think I was very excited about doing the cover of Time magazine because we've had it in our house my entire life. I can remember my parents subscribing to it, and I always was fascinated by the covers and the iconic red borders, so that was all really cool. But when I'm working on it, I'm just working on the art, and I'm not thinking about too much outside of it. When I finally sent it off, I was satisfied. I was very happy with the image, and then I kind of put things away and started thinking about some other things. And the day they released it, which was the following Thursday, I started getting a ton of emails, and my notifications kind of blew up. I thought I knew what viral was, but on Twitter, I looked at it, and I didn't look at it again for a while, and all of a sudden I had 4,000 notifications, and I was like, oh my! I mean, I'm like 10 notifications is great. I don't know what 4,000, and it had been shared all over the place, and same thing with Facebook and Instagram, and I just posted one on each of them. One post on Instagram, one on Facebook, one on Twitter, and it kind of took off. And the the most amazing thing to me is the feedback I've gotten in terms of letters. I was riding into San Francisco on a BART train, which is their local transit, and I got an email from a woman who talked about the night before she had sat down with her husband, and he was not believing Dr. Ford. He was saying she waited too long. How could you wait 30 years or whatever? And it's at that moment she said that she told her husband what happened to her when she was 13 years old,
Wow.
and he finally got it. And I've gotten quite a few letters like that. I've gotten a lot of thank you letters from rape survivors and sexual assault victims and nurses who said they want to use the image in when they're caring for their patients because they think they could be more of a healing and a strong image. So it's been overwhelming. It's been, I don't even know what to say sometimes. So.
John, we're coming to the end of this episode, and what I'd love to do is, a couple things. The name of this show is Artivism, so we talk to people who work at the intersection of art and social activism. And as soon as I saw this, I said, here's an artivist. Do you think of yourself as an artivist? And, is this a statement from you in terms of this work?
I actually do think so. I'm one of those people that has an opinion and is never really too shy to share it. So whether it's on Facebook or Twitter, I dive headlong into the debates. And I have a couple of friends I grew up with who are conservative that we totally disagree on everything, but I think that the debate is important. And it kind of keeps you honest when you have to defend your views and make sure they make sense. And so if somebody's challenging that, it's important. And so, yeah, I do. I work for an organization, Yerba Buena Center for the Arts.
Yes, they have a fantastic reputation.
Yeah, they do. And they do a lot of exactly what you talked about. They're artivists. And I'm actually kind of proud of that distinction, that title. That sounds good to me.
Well, for our listeners, how can they follow you, search for you, reach you on social media?
Sure. Well, my website is zenpop.com, zenpop.com. You can follow me on Twitter at zenpopart, and Instagram zenpop, and there's a Facebook page there somewhere too. I think it's Zenpop, the Art of John Mavroudis. So if you do a search for that, I think it's Zenpop Art as well on Facebook.
And your work is for sale, right? We can go to the website.
Yeah. I have both posters, prints. It talks right now with Time about this image. I did another one of Dr. Blasey Ford for a poster giveaway at the Hardly Strictly Bluegrass Festival in San Francisco, and they're going to be selling that poster, and the 100% of the proceeds will go to a Futures Without Violence is an organization in San Francisco that works with sexual abuse and victims and tries to help out. And I would like to do something with this image from Time as well, but I got to find out what I can and can't do in terms of reproducing it. So other than that, in November I'm going to be doing a screen print for the Harvey Milk piece I did, a limited edition.
Oh, wow.
And I'm also halfway through an Obama piece. I had previously done an image of him being sworn in with civil rights figures from throughout history. That was the cover of the Nation magazine.
Fantastic.
Yeah, and I wanted to do something with that, with all these figures, but make a typographical portrait of President Obama as well.
Oh, so. I'm looking forward to that one.
Me too. I'd like to see it finished is what I'd like, yeah. But, yeah.
So, John, it's been a pleasure talking to you. I would like to say before I end this that I was with my mom and telling her that I was about to talk to you for this podcast, and she said, oh my God, this person is so brilliant. She said, how did he do this? So my mom thinks very highly of the work as well.
I thought only my mom thought that. But
right.
It's good to have two moms that think that.
You probably have a mom fan club, I'm telling you. But thank you so much for your time today. And everyone, listeners out there, this has been a pleasure for me. It's been an honor. You've been listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network. I'm your host, Linda Steele, and I've been talking to artivist John Mavroudis. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Linda.
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Riffin' on jazz.
When two friends get together to kick it
about jazz, it's called Riffin' on Jazz.
Catch us riffing on jazz every week right here on your favorite broadcast or podcast platforms.
Riffin' on jazz on the KUDZUKIAN Network. KUDZUKIAN!
Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network.
Wasn't that a fascinating conversation? I really hated to end it, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. I've been talking to John Mavroudis, the artist of the iconic Time magazine cover of Dr. Christine Blasey Ford. We talked about how he became an artist. We discussed in detail the actual typographical portrait on the cover of Time magazine. And then we talked about some of his future projects. You're not going to want to miss a minute of this conversation. And make sure to check us out on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Stitcher, TuneIn, or your favorite podcast provider. I'm Linda Steele. You've been listening to Artivism on the KUDZUKIAN Network, and I'll see you next time. You will find the Artivism podcast at the intersection of art and social activism. Artivism is executive produced by ArtUp, hosted by Linda Steele, produced, directed, and distributed by KUDZUKIAN.